Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge and Company. One of the most astute political commentators I know is Ester Fuchs, a tenured professor of public affairs and political science at Columbia University. And even though she knows how the government should work, she also saw how the government actually works during her 4 years in City Hall as a mayoral advisor. Her enthusiasm for both policy and politics is what makes her so special. And she's my guest today. Welcome.
Thank you.
You're
I'm so
very
delighted
welcome.
to be here.
Good. So you went to the mayor's State of the City speech. Tell me about it.
Well, I thought that he really gave an excellent speech. He did what he needed to do, which is talk about his accomplishments and then lay out his plan for the next term without sounding that hyperbolic bell that he tends to do often when he speaks until the end. And he focused on not just his old issue of income inequality, which I've written on and find to be something
I wanted to talk about that.
Yeah, and I hope we get to talk about that because I don't think that mayors have tools to really deal effectively with the income inequality issue. But they can obviously offer progressive, or what some of us like to call liberal policies.
I want to talk about that too.
Good, okay, I'm hitting all the notes. Policies that can really raise up low-income people and also create economic opportunity. And so, you know, he talked about keeping the city safe, and he started with that. And I, for one, think that was a very smart move because for those of us who have a memory, we know that without a safe city, middle-class people do not want to live here and businesses do not want to invest here. And many cities in the country have to deal with that problem of safety and cannot attract investment. And cities that can't attract investment or the middle class have no tax dollars to do all the other good things that we might want to do. Right. So he gets that, and he touted his crime statistics. The crime continued to go down last year for robberies, burglaries, and murders, and he started with that.
Did he mention the community and the police and the mayor and the police?
He didn't really talk about his problems with the police department. He talked about solving the contract problem for 71% of city workers, which I don't think includes the rank and file police. The Patrolmen's Benevolent Association still doesn't have a contract. And I guess one can't really expect a mayor to talk about their problems in their state of the city. Right. So we sort of understand that. You know, he talked about wanting to actually build on Michael Bloomberg's legacy on climate change and resiliency. I think that's the only issue that he actually gives.
Does that come into the job creation and job training?
He's doing it from both perspectives. He really understands environmental sustainability is an important issue. I personally think that this challenge of the 21st century city is not just economic development as it was historically, but it's environmental sustainability, and mayors who get that are ahead of the curve, and Mike Bloomberg was way ahead of the curve on that, and so that is an issue that de Blasio manages to give him some credit for, and he's trying to build on that. And he is doing it from both the environmental perspective as well as workforce development.
So the main thrust, the paper, everybody has said, will be housing. So he's going to build a lot of housing. Yeah. Is that going to be environmentally sound, and is that going to be part of the job creation?
You know, that's a really good question because he didn't talk about housing in terms of environmental sustainability much. His focus on housing, he did connect it a little bit to job creation. He did say, you know, if we do this, we've got, he said, hundreds of thousands of construction jobs. So I have...
It's like the Keystone Pipeline.
Yeah, right. You know, we have no way of measuring that because it's over, the timeline for the housing policy is really, I think, 2024. So he's still sticking to his 200,000 units of affordable and preserved affordable housing, which is a big agenda, but it's also an agenda that has a timeline that extends beyond his 8 years in office. which I think is the
Good.
correct thing to do. And he talked about workforce development in the context of housing too, but you know, that wasn't the main focus. The main focus on housing for him, and I think for most of us in this city, has to do with this issue of you can't live in this city if you have to spend 60% of your income on rent or housing costs. And so he won the election, I believe, on the affordability issue. While he talked about income inequality, I think most of the public translated that into in their heads into the affordability problem, the housing affordability problem.
In the article that you wrote, and you talked about the whole question of the increasing disparity and all that, and that we're never going to bring equality just in the city, that we need other roles of government. In the housing proposal, he's basically doing it himself, though, isn't he? He's not looking for more funding for the housing, or is he?
Well, he's looking to the private sector. He is really going to be using zoning and inclusionary zoning, particularly, put it on the table, and density. Those are the two pieces of the puzzle, and he identified 3 neighborhoods: Sunnyside Yards, which is the Long Island Railroad tracks in Queens, and it's a huge area, part of the South Bronx at the end of the Grand Concourse, and the Rockaways. And these are not densely populated areas. The Rockaways has no mass transit, so he actually tried to address that with a citywide network of ferries and bus rapid transit. But he recognizes this issue that you can't create density without increasing transportation options. That's the huge problem for us. But his affordable housing agenda really has these 2 elements to it. It has a zoning element, and it has also a density element. You know, the problem on density, as we know, in increasing heights, not every neighborhood wants it. And he's, you know, a mayor who says, I consult with the neighborhoods, I want to do all this stuff. You know, we see all over the city now high-rises going up as of right, which means, as you know, they don't have to consult the Planning Commission or the City Council because they bought the air rights, and you're sort of looking up, wondering where these things came from.
So what agency administers the tax assistance? I mean, the inclusionary housing. Where does that go?
The inclusionary housing issue will be city planning and HPD. Those are the 2 primary agencies.
So they just
and
have
the Department of
they
Buildings.
approve. It's just they're approving
And the city
arrangement.
council has to be part of this approval process. So he was very careful to acknowledge that the city council has been his partner in housing affordability. And this is an area where I said in my article too, he has a lot of tools to address this problem that could impact people over the long term and could impact the value of their income. If you pay less for housing, you have more to spend on other things. I think he has a problem on income inequality more broadly because the only way you can really address income inequality, which is about the distribution of income, it's not about poverty per se, it's a relative concept. You have to bring down the income of the rich because we have a lot of poor people in New York City still. We have over 1.1 million poor people in New York still, even though people think, you know, we're doing so well. Not everybody here is doing so well. And the mayor cares about that clearly, but this is kind of misunderstood in a way. The ability to bring up that bottom group is not going to impact the top, and the top is so rich in New York that you continue to have this great disparity. And the truth is, even though it wasn't said elegantly by Michael Bloomberg, we really don't want rich people to move out of New York. We want to figure out how to tax them in a way that's fair so that they pay their fair share and we can provide basic services. But the problem of Detroit is not income inequality, it's poverty.
That was a very interesting point. Did you make that in your article?
Yes, that was, yes.
Yes, that the income disparity, that Detroit is like number 35 on a list of cities.
Right.
And New York is 3.
Right.
Because there are so many poor people in Detroit and and very few, if any, wealthy people.
That's right. So
It's
you can have
interesting.
no income inequality and everybody's poor.
Right.
That's not the outcome we
Well,
really
now it's
want.
a national issue. I mean, you hear the
Yes.
Republicans talking about it, but they're not going to increase. I mean, it's the popular issue. Everybody's talking about income inequality.
Well,
But
it's a national issue.
if they
It
don't
needs to be
change the
addressed.
tax system,
Right.
we'll never do it, right?
That's exactly
Because
right.
the point is, to, in a way, to bring the net income down, not the gross income, the net income.
That's exactly right, and it has to be done nationally because cities don't have that luxury of trying to get rid of rich people so they can flatten the income.
Right.
We need
The tax
we
revenue.
need the tax revenue. And if they move to Westchester or they move to Florida or Arizona, we don't get to tax
And take
them.
it to the next level. States are afraid to raise it because then they'll lose it to the next state.
Right, and I think, you know, the mayor brought up in his speech about increasing the minimum wage to, you know, and he's had that on his agenda, and he wants to go further than the governor did, but and I think it's good to put it in his speech, but it's, again, he doesn't have the tools to do that. The governor and the state legislature had the tools to do that. He had a big win on universal pre-K. No question about it. And that, I believe, is about creating economic opportunity, which is not the same as reducing income inequality. So these are important pieces of legislation. But when he went after that little tax on people making more than $1 million, not only did the state legislature, you know, laugh at him, but the public didn't even care. If you look at public opinion polls, the public's not that interested in taxing rich people. They may want their standard of living to increase. They may want, you know, more affordability in housing, better public services, better schools. The issue of income inequality, only 2% of the population in the last Quinnipiac poll says income inequality is an important issue facing the city. So I think, like, this speech, he actually modified his rhetoric, you know, sort of until the end, when, you know, I think he just so much wants to do something big and important, and he's got to say it that way, and he can't let the rest of us who want to talk about him do it. He needs to let other people talk about what he does in the big, important terms, and, you know, and stick to the meat and potatoes of what people want mayors to do in cities now.
Do you think the president is really presenting us with the agenda to make incomes more equal?
Right. I mean, what's
very
exciting
interesting.
about presidential politics now is the minute Barack Obama lost the Senate, he woke up and he seems to be freed from some politics that he had going on in his head.
When he did that, when he refused to do a few things before the elections, it was due to the pressure of the party. I mean, I really hold the party more responsible than I do the president, but I've always been soft on the president, so I don't know.
And you know more about that than I do, really, and I trust your judgment on that. I was disappointed that he believed that the Republicans were going to work with him, and it took him 6 years to figure out that they're not. So the fact that he's doing executive orders around immigration, you know, the fact that he put a workforce agenda on the table now, really strong one, these to me are, you know, indicators that he's ready to rumble. And I think, you know, it's way overdue, way overdue.
He's setting the parameters for the next election, isn't he? For the Democratic candidate.
Absolutely doing that.
Yeah.
He's doing that I think he's most effective he's ever been since, you know, the second year when he lost the House.
Right. Well, he was under such pressure not to do the immigration until after these senators had won their elections, and of course they didn't win them anyway. So
Yeah, you're more generous than I choose to be in terms of his.
Yeah, I can't help it. I'm totally captivated by his smile.
Well, you're entitled. You're entitled.
And by him, anyway.
Yeah.
Let's talk the roles of government. I mean, the city can't exist without the state. It's never going to be independent, is it?
That's correct. And, you know, we had that effort to make New York the 51st state. You may remember that. I do. There were several interesting people involved in that. I think Jimmy Breslin was one of them. And everybody laughed then. And then over time, it became more reasonable almost. Because, look, the upstate economies are not in great shape. Andrew Cuomo's done a lot trying to rebuild these economies. But, if you were a sort of, let's say, moderate to conservative economist and doing a traditional cost-benefit analysis, and you looked how tax dollars have been redistributed in New York State, how much money do you invest in a sinkhole? Yeah. Basically, in many of these places. I'm not saying everywhere, and I'm not saying we don't do some redistribution like that, but New York continues, the city that is, not to get its fair share from the state in terms of taxes. Now, if we had a delegation from the city that actually acted as a block, maybe we could get back, for example, the commuter tax, which was ridiculous to lose, and it's time to put that back on the table. So maybe our new majority leader in the assembly will start.
The speaker. Let's talk about the state. Let's talk about the state legislature. How does it exist year after year? You really have done as much as you can to increase voter participation.
Well, thank you. I mean, my Who's on the Ballot's been a labor of love for me.
Who's on the Ballot is a website.
Yes, it's a website that makes it easy for people to access information about their candidates and also find out how to register to vote. And it's been doing pretty well, but you need a lot of outreach on the ground to get the information to people that these kinds of things are available. But we have low voter turnout, declining voter turnout, and that's something to be very concerned about.
People get elected to the state assembly or the state senate or the city council with less than 10,000 votes. Because 5,000 votes.
You're absolutely right.
And look at what we get as a mix.
Well, to me, so many people devalue voting and they think, it's all about
it's not going to make any
direct participation, community engagement. I love this participatory budgeting that the council members are doing on their member items now, which is very interesting. However, at the end of the day, when all is said and done, if you don't vote, somebody wins, and it's probably not going to be the person you wanted, and there's no accountability for the big issues that we care about. And over again, we've seen that happen in the state legislature over and over again, where, remember Ed Koch did the campaign on campaign, basically getting the assembly to do what the city does on campaign finance and campaign accountability, and they all signed on, and then they betrayed him, basically. Citizens Union, they go in and they hammer out these deals with Common Cause and Citizens Union, and then we have no ethics.
Well, now they're electing, today they elected or are electing a new speaker who comes with some questionable things about his practices. And isn't he the county leader also?
He's the county leader of the Bronx.
I grew up in the reform movement. You don't hold public and party office at the same time.
He said he's going to step down from the county leadership position. But the truth is he's been minimally vetted by the press, by anybody that
certainly by the members.
Certainly by the members, although I have a feeling they know what they're getting and why they're choosing him. He's somebody who doesn't leak to the press. He's got a similar approach as the previous speaker had in terms of keeping the assembly strong relative to the governor and the Senate. I mean, so there's an agenda that members have that's different than the public has in terms of who they want in a speaker. There's no question about that. I'm hoping that whatever he has going on is minimal and he can clean it up very quickly. It would be just a travesty.
Have you ever thought of reinterpreting the role of a speaker of a legislative body?
I haven't personally, but it's a very interesting idea. I think you did that when you were in the council, didn't you?
It's built in. It's just built in that is always going to be favors and tit for tat and abuses. It's just built into the whole system. And somehow, at some point, I see that Cuomo has called for a constitutional amendment. He didn't call for a convention.
I didn't see a constitutional convention, but he's putting an ethics bill out now that he's asking them to pass. So this is hopeful, because I think this is an opportunity that you don't want to lose when people feel a little vulnerable. If you don't do it now, we can go back to business as usual very quickly in Albany, where no one pays that much attention.
You talked before about progressive, and I love this dispute between the use of progressive and liberal. We have a progressive caucus now in the city council.
Right.
And that's where we get the participatory democracy, the budgeting and all of that. But why can't we go back to liberal? I mean, we got scared out of using the word liberal. By whom? Who was it?
By the conservatives, by the public opinion polls, because Ronald Reagan was so effective at demonizing liberals that basically it trickled down from the national politics to every level of politics. Everyone decided this term is tainted. It comes with baggage that we don't want to associate with anymore. And so we need to find another term to distinguish ourselves from conservatives. These are the electeds who are really more responsible for the change of language, reflecting back
on the public opinion.
Public
but
opinion.
It's further divided the Democratic Party. I don't think it's a productive term.
That's very interesting.
I think it really is not a productive term. And if the party was strong and had the agenda it used to have, then everybody would be in that same boat as being liberal.
I think you're right, but I think what's happened...
I think it's a lost cause.
I don't know if I'd fight that fight right now, given how many there are to fight, but I think what happened is that you're... when you call yourself a progressive, you allow yourself to be fiscally conservative and socially liberal. That's sort of the interpretation now. So what happened to the Democrats is they got tarred and feathered with being the big spenders, and again, this goes back to Reagan being so effective at demonizing government, at making people think they get nothing from government, to the point in which people don't even understand that Social Security is government. And so that's part of the communications strategy that I think the Democrats haven't effectively handled yet. They need to re-educate the public about what they get from government so that they can take back the discourse and basically make a case for an activist form of government. And I don't believe the language of income inequality is going to do it. I think you have to do it on these more basic kinds of economic opportunity issues and education and workforce development. Those are the three areas. And I think affordable housing fits in for mayors.
You've done a lot of work with workforce development.
Yes.
But is it effective?
Deep breath. So when I did the work on reorganizing workforce development with Rob Walsh and Jeannie Mulgrove in the Bloomberg administration, who were at SBS then and the Department of Youth and Community Development, when I started, I really thought the problem was the governance structure, that the city essentially wasn't organized correctly to provide these services, but that all the providers were out there doing job training really well. Remember, it used to be called JTPA and job training, and now it's the workforce. They actually changed it. It was from the Workforce Investment Act to the Workforce Investment and Opportunity Act, or something like that. But so I thought, the providers who were contracted to do job training knew what they were doing. It turns out it's actually hard, and there are some people in our city, we're very fortunate, who know how to do job training and who actually know how to distinguish between the needs to do soft skills training and what it means to really develop skills. And in my research, what I found, interestingly, is that the several unions that are connected, like the healthcare workers union and the construction the construction folks, their training is really effective. And one program that I was able to do a study of was the Malloy pre-apprenticeship program for construction skills for minority youth. And I was blown away when I realized the difference of what happens to a kid with a young African-American, primarily male, who graduates high school and only has a high school diploma. If he goes into the Malloy pre-construction skills and goes into the union, the difference, I did one of those little econometric models. I went to my economist friends. I said, I want one of those. Show me how to do this. The difference of this investment, this minimal investment of what is it, $10,000, to what the lifetime of earnings for that person. It's millions of dollars.
So you need to have the job
Yes.
before you do the training.
And that's such an important point. And what was so important about construction skills is they moved them into the union apprenticeship
Right.
programs
So great.
where the jobs were there. They didn't take in too many and say, we don't have a job for you at the end of this.
So you weren't looking through a phone,
right. And
yellow
they
pages of a phone
pre-screen the
book.
kids.
Yeah.
And you'll laugh at this. One of my favorite findings from this is, one of the things they used for pre-screening was high school attendance. Guess what? If you show up in high school, you're likely to show up on the job. So I'm not saying, we have the answers for every young adult who needs employment, but there are some things we can really do better. The Hospital Workers Union, Debbie King's programs routinely have trained young African American and Latino men and women for jobs in the healthcare workers professions, and the very important thing for me is placement, but also retention, the term of art, because so many of these programs that do placement look for them 9 months later. So we have to focus on all those pieces, and we can do it. The end of the story is there's not enough money in this system to make it really work the way we need to. And you have to collaborate with business, so you train people for real jobs.
The end of this interview is that we're at the end.
Oh my God.
You'll have to come back because we've touched so many things and there are so many more things to talk about. I mean, the job training alone is just incredible. So, Ester Fuchs, thank you so much.
Thank you for having
me.
me.
Always wonderfully interesting and stimulating. You're still an optimist, aren't you, about government?
I am. How did you I'm so glad you said that, and it's so glad to be with you on the program. Thank you. I love your program.
Thank you. If there are any people you'd like to hear and topics you'd like us to explore, please let me know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you.